Hey everyone, welcome back to another video. Today, we're going to talk about the 11 nations inside America and maybe understand some of the reasons why America is a bit of a divided country. This video is based off an article published on Business Insider by Mark Abadi, which itself is based off a book called The American Nations Today by Colin Woodard. You can find the links to both the article and the book in the description below. Now, before we get started, we should understand that America, or more correctly the US, aren't the only country in the world to have different nations within it. In fact, there are very few perfect nation states, where the overwhelming majority of the population is defined by the same ethnic identity. It's also related to culture, customs, religion, and even state borders. For a better understanding, the opposite of a perfect nation state would be the old empire, like the Ottoman Empire or the Austro-Hungarian Empire. Today, it's said that there are only 3 perfect nation states: Iceland, Japan, and Portugal. Portugal being the only one that isn't an island, but has occupied the same state borders for over 900 years. So, the US really aren't alone in this. But let's get started and take a look at the 11 nations which, according to Colin Woodard, make up the United States. First, let's take a look at the map and list all of them out. We have the left coast, which includes Alaska, the far west, the Midlands, El Norte, which is in the south of the US but bleeds into North Mexico, Greater Appalachia, the deep south, New France, Tidewater, New Netherland, Yankeedom, and the First Nation, which spreads into Canada. It's interesting to see how some of these sub-nations spread across totally different regions. For instance, New France exists in the south of the US and in this part of Canada, probably related to the fact that these were the regions predominantly colonized by the French. According to the author, these regions are nations or sub-nations with different customs and cultural identities, which contribute to instability and the division of the United States. So let's take a look at each of these sub-nations and their identities. First, Yankeedom. Yankeedom includes in it New England, upstate New York, and the industrial Midwest, from North Pennsylvania to Minnesota. Yankeedom people reside in states founded by Puritans, so they're more comfortable with government regulation, increasingly valuing education and citizen participation in government initiatives, as well as being more welcoming to outsiders. When we hear the word Yankee, our mind usually jumps to the American Civil War, where you also had a differentiation between Yankees in the north and Dixies in the deep south. Next, right next to Yankeedom, we have New Netherland, meaning Greater New York City, North New Jersey, and Connecticut. This region was initially settled by Dutch explorers before falling into the hands of the British, so they kept a bunch of values related to the Netherlands, such as ethnic and religious diversity, freedom of speech and conscience, and a tendency for trade, all values related to the Dutch and Protestant culture. We can relate this, for instance, to how welcoming the Dutch were to immigrants from Portugal or Spain when these two countries expelled the Jews hundreds of years ago. The flags of New York City are a good illustration of Dutch influence in the region, being in the same color scheme as the Dutch flag. If you're interested in this, check out my video on the flag of the Netherlands. Then we have the Midlands, a region with a lot of ethnic diversity and politically moderate views, going from Pennsylvania and Delaware through the Midwest in Ohio, Indiana, and Illinois, and down to the plains of Nebraska and Kansas, even including part of New Mexico and the Texas Panhandle. Woodard writes that the Midlands society is very pluralistic and organized around the middle class. People tend to reject more government intrusion. Going back to the East Coast, Tidewater, which include precisely the coastal areas of old colonial states like Maryland, Virginia, and North Carolina. Woodard relates this region's respect for authority and traditions to its background as a feudal society which in the old times embraced slavery. He says that equality and public participation in politics are less of a priority. Moving to Greater Appalachia, it includes the area from southwest Pennsylvania and West Virginia down to the lower Midwest, through Kentucky, Tennessee, and Arkansas, into Oklahoma and Texas. The author says that this region has a warrior ethic and is committed to personal sovereignty and individual liberty. The majority of the region sided with the Union, meaning the North, during the Civil War, but today aligns itself with southern states in opposing the central government's reach. It's interesting to see how some of these regions were definitely influenced by which country colonized them, but also influenced by the American Civil War and the North-South differences. Traveling precisely to the south, the Deep South, where the aforementioned Dixies are from, a region also with its roots in the slave societies of the West Indies, like the Caribbean islands, where democracy was reserved for the privileged. Woodard says that the people in this region tend to be against the expansion of federal powers. They're against taxes and most types of regulation. This region would include North Carolina, South Carolina, Georgia, North Florida, Mississippi, North Louisiana, and East Texas. Texas is usually the poster boy for the Deep South idea. The Lone Star State is often used as the example of a southern U.S. state that is very conservative and very opposed to central rule, threatening secession and independence. Going to what is probably the opposite of the Deep South, even though it's very close, New France, with its focus on New Orleans in the US, but also Quebec in Canada. It's called this because of the French colonization of these two regions, even though the French quickly lost their possessions in North America to the British and the Spanish. The people in this region have a long history of being oppressed too, especially African Americans. So after the oppression started to fade out, people became egalitarians, consensus-driven, and one of the most liberal in America, accepting of people of any type and interested in government involvement in social and economic issues. Next, El Norte, including Southwest Texas and the Mexican border regions in New Mexico, Arizona, and California, also including parts of northern Mexico itself. We saw how New France is influenced by French culture and how New Netherlands is influenced by Dutch culture. Here we have the influence of the Spanish Empire. Hispanic culture is dominant in this region. Woodard says that the El Norte people are exceptionally independent and self-sufficient, adaptable, and focused on work. Even though it's not mentioned as one of the 11 nations, South Florida is also mentioned by Woodard as a region highly influenced by the Spanish Caribbean. Traveling a little north, the far west, the Great Plains and Mountain West. The author says that the people in this region aren't big fans of the federal government, and that this is due to their history. The first cities in the far west were built by railroad and mining corporations, which made them somewhat dependent of the central government, so they would be more willing to blame the central government for what goes wrong. This region includes the West Dakotas, Nebraska, Kansas, Montana, Colorado, amongst others. Interestingly, also including the Anchorage and Fairbanks regions of Alaska. A little further west we have the left coast, including the Pacific coast of California, Oregon, Washington, and also part of Alaska. This region wasn't colonized by Europeans, rather it was settled by Americans themselves, specifically New Englanders and Midwesterners. So according to Woodard, the area is a bit of a hybrid of Yankee utopianism and Midwestern self-expression. Politically, they tend to align with the northern East Coast, leaning more towards Democrats in elections. There is, however, a big difference between the coastal population of these states and their inland neighbors. Lastly, the First Nation, the largest but least populated region of Woodard's nation. The region is mostly within Canada and includes people who are natives of the American continent, refusing to give up their land to white settlers and continuing to retain their cultural practices and knowledge. So here we have the 11 nations that exist within the US. All of this was just a quick summary of the article and the book, but the point is that it's important to understand that within the same country, different cultures coexist, different principles and different beliefs, and these differences tend to contribute to dividing the country, especially in political aspects. States like the ones in Yankeedom region which approve government regulation can be more willing to vote Democrat, while the Deep South is more willing to vote Republican. In fact, the 2016 election reflects precisely this, and the comparison with the 2012 and 2008 elections show the same Republican-Democrat division, with 7 of the regions being predominantly Democrat and the other 4 predominantly Republican. Essentially, cultural differences within the US are a good way to understand why the country is still so divided, and why certain regions tend to vote as they do. Thanks for watching this video. Make sure to check out the article on Business Insider and the actual book too. Leave a comment with your opinions. Do you agree with the author or maybe not? And make sure to subscribe to catch future videos. Once again, thanks for watching and I'll see you on the next video.